virtual event. And this is our third leadership seminar, which is good. I think we have two more after Dr. Tina's. And so before I introduce Dr. Tina Carol Garrison, I want to state why we chose this topic this afternoon. It's a very important one, given what's been going around our country, and to include diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've always said that, or at least it was conveyed to me by one of my mentor and tormentor, that the common denominator or standard expected of leaders chosen to lead any organization is that they set the tone on how he or she intend to lead by expressing their leadership philosophy or articulating their moral code, if they have one, their identity to his or her employees, basically who they are and where they come from before they took over an organization. And of course, this is very important to the employees because they need to know who the boss is. And just because they have an impressive resume or have led organizations before, this doesn't mean that anything to the organization. It only means that can they back up what they aspire to accomplish when they do assume the responsibility. Of course, incivility in the workplace or toxic environment, we've had that before, especially recently. There's been a lot of white papers that have been going around on what toxic leadership is about, is avoidable. For instance, in the military, leaders are expected to foster, and this is an expectation as a standard to command, our leaders to foster a positive, safe, and healthy command climate, ergo throughout the entire organization. In fact, when a captain all the way up to a four-star general assumes command, they have to conduct a command climate survey within 90 days of their command. And these are not good reports by any stretch of the imagination. So, and when they get bad news, typically we get defensive. But, the solution is, how are you going to improve over time? So, big or small organizations, we promote civility throughout the organization, which is a tall order for any leaders, whether you're CEO or down having a small business. But it is almost difficult to do. Things can get out of the ordinary. Complaints against bosses are normal. It shouldn't be. But then, they want to either resolve it or make the thing go away, or they get fired. Now, I've known Dr. Tina for over 20 years. I think it was 2000.
It was right after my confirmation.
Right. Since we worked a long time, since her confirmation. Yes, we're both Catholics, by the way. Together at a former Army organization called the Army Community and Family Support Center. I'm a tactical guy. I came off the field and I was told I was going to lead this organization. I didn't know what it was, but I found out quickly. And I commanded this organization for 2 years. It had a global mission of providing morale, recreational, and welfare to our troops around the world. A huge organization comprised of about 3,000 employees, civilian employees, and 23 civilians. Probably the most difficult command I've ever experienced. I'd spread out across the United States, Pacific, and South Korea and Europe. And of course, all the employees were pretty much on their own, with supervision, of course. And I had the privilege of going around the world visiting them, either in Bosnia or some remote location in Korea. And you could imagine some of the complaints I got over the horizon about whatever you can dream of, not getting paid, a lot of complaints against them by the customers. And so, it kind of creates some semblance of incivility in the workplace. And as you read Dr. Tina's resume, she had a series of successes in her professional career and diverse assignments and leading garrisons, albeit her last name, meaning large installation twice. You could almost imagine some of the things that goes on in those organizations, and dealing with all sorts of people and issues. So, I also want to acknowledge two of our guests, Martin Martin Devey. I'm sorry, Kevin Devey, a senior lecturer with the Waterford Institute of Technology, along with Mark Smith, a senior research fellow engineer. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Martina Carroll Garrison from her hometown called Fort Garrison in Ireland.
It is.
Give her our applause.
General Taguba, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. Just to pile in on that story, General Taguba has been my mentor and tormentor for over 20 years now. And as you all know, when you have a mentor and they help you along with your career, you become an indentured servant. And so when they pick up the phone and call, you go, yes, sir, how high? So I have been helping to provide my skill set back into PPAM these many years. And General Taguba generously refers to me as his token Atlantic Islander. So we are the island people here today. Okay, let me share the screen back again. And big screen. Did I get it right? That's what happens when you turn it down. So do we have the big, my full screen up there? Thank you. Okay, workplace civility matters. So a couple of things to take away from today. This is a rambling narrative about why workplace civility matters. And you will walk away today with some distinctions and some additional vocabulary. And yes, I tell this story from a Western European perspective, but I'll explain why as I'm telling the story so that you can understand how it relates to the founding documents that are part of our US story. So bear with me while I tell this story and tell why it matters in our contemporary workplace. But before I ever begin any soft skill workshop, I start with this idea that awareness is the greatest agent for change. You know, we all could sit in classrooms for months and months at a time and delve into really deep topics, philosophical topics, leadership topics, but it is not the theoretical content that makes you a better leader. It's the awareness of ideas, the awareness of philosophies, and of course, the awareness of your own behaviors. So regardless of what you take away from today, the biggest takeaway is that it is the awareness that workplace civility matters is the thing that's going to help you make a difference in your work life. So what is this thing, civility? And I'm going to flip this coin over and back throughout the conversation. I'm going to talk about civility and then the flip side or the shadow side, which is incivility. So definitions of civility are politeness, the formal politeness that results from observing social conventions, the act of showing regard for others, the civilized conduct, especially courtesy, politeness, or simply the behavior between persons and groups that conforms to social modes, that is, in accordance with the behavior of a civil society. So I didn't just fall upon this topic. People have been writing about it since forever. And when I say the story is from a Western European perspective, this will become clear when I show the writers, the initial writers that I cite. De Tocqueville, way back when, spoke about civility being the etiquette of democracy. And so if we think that civility is just something that Miss Manners publishes about in the Sunday newspaper, no, it is the underpinning of our democracy. And that's why when we deviate from being civil, we are diminishing the value of our democracy. And that will show up in multiple negative ways in our workplace. Arnott and Arneson speaks to civility being a public moral dimension. So we're talking very high level ideas of what civility actually means in the world, not just in the workplace. Beauregard says that civility is a form of goodness resulting from our awareness of others. How could we be uncivil to somebody else if we were aware of their humanity? Carter's published several books, but his nugget is that civility is the ethic of relating to the stranger. And for those of you who have a strong biblical background, you might see somewhere in your Bible readings this idea that we are defined by how well we treat strangers. So civility is the ethic of relating to a stranger, somebody who owes us nothing. Forney, several books, but he says civility is liberating. It frees us from self-absorption, from impulse, and from mood. So if we consistently wear the overcoat of civil behavior, we are not distracted by our baser selves. Davidson says the extent to which citizens of a given culture speak and act in ways that demonstrate a caring for the welfare of others, as well as the welfare of the culture they share in common. So if all of us, regardless of our politics or religion or any other ism or preference, if we all understood that our behavior was an indication of our commitment to our civilization, how could we act uncivilly? So I'm sharing these quotes with you simply to demonstrate that it is a higher level than something you read in the back page of the Sunday newspaper, and it has been written about extensively for multiple decades, generations, eras, hundreds of years. So now I'm going to tell you this little story. And I say it is from a Western European perspective, but when we get to the end of it, I'll explain why it's told from a Western European perspective. Back in the Dark Ages, and so picture in your mind the worst feudalist movie you've ever seen. There was a time in our society where the civility that we know it today was not practiced. Random acts of violence. And if we believed that fundamentally civility is the ethic of relating to a stranger, the historic context of Western society and civility, it actually emerged as a nascent social contract. Think about civility as a social contract during Europe's Middle Ages. However, its origins was less about the considerations of others and more about maintaining a rigid delineation between individual groups representing different power sources. Incivility, the contrast to civility, incivility is typically used by those in power to preserve their power. So keep that nugget in your mind as I'm telling you this story. Incivility is generally used by those in power to preserve their power, yet the emergence of civility was a social contract. I won't murder your family if you don't murder mine. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but this is how the emergence of civility came about from a Western perspective. After this period of collective refraining from violence and gratuitous cruelty, a new era, a new Western European perspective emerged where social restraint gave rise to functioning and effective protectorates. So think about this for a moment, and this could have been any cultural group around the world, but from an era of gratuitous cruelty, there was a social contract that emerged over time, and a new era began, and social restraint gave rise to functioning political organizations and functioning and effective protectorates across, again, from Western Europe perspective. This takes us to the era of the nation states, the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, social distinctions through education of knights in the courtly ways of different courts began to arise. So in society, your place in society was recognized by how well you adhered to civil behavior. In fact, John Locke wrote in 1698 in his book concerning toleration that within a climate of tolerance, the concept of reciprocity would support the respect of others' rights in exchange for the respect of individuals. So this idea of mutual restraint, and I know any of you that are War College graduates are anticipating going to the War College, this idea of mutual restraint is a foundational element in all of our institutions. Taking us to the French Revolution and beyond, after 1799, the French bourgeois class actually used the courtesies and the civil behaviors of the noble class and the tools of speech to actually advance the civil and intellectual discourses and literature for the greater good of France and ultimately for the greater good of Europe and the foundational documents that created the United States, when you look through the triumvirate of our founding documents. We're moving a little bit closer now into Victorian England. The Victorians took this idea of civility and restraint one step further. Their idea was that civility embodied the direct relationship between self-regulation and public welfare. So you see how this theme is recurring, that for the good of all, I will conduct myself in a certain way, because when I don't conduct myself in a certain way, we can very easily slip back into feudal behaviors. Self-control of the individual became inextricably linked to the good of society and vice versa. And so then we get to the triumvirate of our documentation that is the founding of the United States. The founding of the American democracy. I'm a naturalized citizen, so I needed this for my naturalization exam, and then plus some more. But the founding of the American democracy and this concept of civility and courteous behavior towards all men was actually presented in the American founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. However, I am under no illusion about the intended inclusiveness of the belief that all rights and privileges were equally conferred on all citizens at that time, at the creation of those documents. But here we are today in 2021, and the expectation is that the rights of these documents are attributable to all of our citizens today. So obviously we went through the Civil War, and after the Civil War, in the aftermath of the Civil War, and I'm hugely oversimplifying a very long protracted process, but in the aftermath of the Civil War, unification, reconciliation, and reconstruction were important to American well-being and recovery. Thus, again, this idea of mutual restraint and reciprocity of civil behavior was necessary to recover from in the aftermath of the Civil War. That is a very, very short rendition of 500 or 600 years worth of how did we get to be here where we have the language to talk about civility and incivility and why it matters. Let's take it down a notch now into our workplace. The spectrum of deviant workplace behaviors, it's broad, yet civility or incivility is recognized along the continuum of behaviors that can lead to destruction of property, physical aggression, violence, and even murder. As I just outlined, acts of incivility are recognized as gateway behaviors that often escalate and cross over into violence. And I know General Takuba mentioned I've worked in a couple of different garrisons. And if you've worked in a garrison, or if you've worked in an environment where you've had different tiers of people working there, blue-collar workers, part-time workers, for different reasons, people get into conflict in the workplace. And something might start out as a mild disagreement, but over time it may escalate and result in a long drawn out campaign with EEO involved or human resources involved. There may end up being litigation, there may end up being a fight. And we are all familiar with news reports of explosions or death or murder that may take place in a workplace. And anybody interviewed after these types of horrendous incidents will say, yeah, I wasn't surprised. You know, it started out as a disagreement. It started out as something low level that festered that nobody ever dealt with. So this idea that we came through 600 years of becoming more civil, and now we're allowing incivility to fester at a low level in our workplace when we know that incivility is a gateway behavior to more deviant acts in your workplace. And so as we look at what happens in a workplace, and I know this is theoretical for the moment, but I want you to have this an awareness that there's a body of research behind it, and through that you can understand what's happening when it's happening, other than it's just uncomfortable behavior. There are two centers of deviant behavior in the workplace. There's an organizational center and an interpersonal center. These are two distinct centers of behavior. Under the organizational focus, your work group would expect to observe either production or property deviance. Either somebody's on a go slow, or they're something as simple as they're breaking the copy machine. Production deviance is experienced through diminished output or withdrawal of efficiency. Under the interpersonal focus, the group could expect to observe either political deviance or personal aggression. So when we talk about deviance and we talk about incivility, it can manifest in multiple low-level ways that you go, oh, it's not so bad, I'm really not going to worry about it. But then as it starts to escalate, you wished you had dealt with it earlier. We know political deviance disrupts the overall well-being of the organization and typically encompasses behaviors that singles out individual employees. In all of this discussion, in today's workplace incivility has four root causes: declining social behavior, a changing workplace, declining trust, and changing workers. And I'm going to expand upon those a little bit for a minute. But you're probably at this moment thinking, why does this matter to me? If somebody else is being rude or discourteous and it's happening down the hall, is it really your problem? Because we're really at the low end of deviant behavior here, and why should it matter? And as we get to the end of today's discussion, I'll give you some reasons as to why everybody owns the solution set for workplace incivility and for creating a civil workforce. So for the cat lovers in the group, no cat got harmed in the taking of this photograph, but incivility does concern you. Incivility concerns employees throughout the organization. This is when you see something, say something. And we'll do some skill building on what say something looks like. But let me first put some numbers on this. And this isn't just Dr. Tina, but there's a huge body of research behind this. 99% of workplace members surveyed across thousands of organizations have witnessed workplace incivility. And you're probably thinking, yeah, I have, but I never thought it was that big a deal. And what happens is we've become so desensitized to it that we've not done anything about it up until now. 96% have reported firsthand experience of incivility. 80% of employees wasted work effort worrying about the uncivil behavior that they either experienced or deserved. 78% reduced organizational dedication. They withheld their best effort. 63% wasted effort to avoid the instigator. Think about a time you might have gone the long way around the building to avoid that guy. 48% reduced work effort as a result of experiencing or observing incivility. 47% decreased work attendance. 38% purposely decreased work quality, and 12% changed jobs. So 1 in 10 employees changed jobs because there was uncivil behavior in their workplace. Is there a way here to ask by a show of hands, or have we got that set up in Zoom? I should have asked in advance there.
Everybody put it on chat if you have a question or if you have an answer.
Okay. If this was a live group, I would take this around the room and ask, and for a show of hands, see who has had these experiences. But what I want you to do after today's workshop is to reflect upon how frequently you've had these different experiences, and perhaps how desensitized you've become to uncivil behavior in your work life or in your workplace. So by a show of hands, can we do this here? Who has ever acted uncivilly in your workplace now that you have a little bit more understanding or a little bit more distinction about what uncivil behavior looks like? And so the reason I ask this question is invariably the response I get is not me, not in this organization, not in our group, not now, not here. And yet, if we as a group have never been the perpetrator of uncivil behavior, how did all those other statistics occur? What happened? So somebody somewhere, there's a disconnect. And a huge deal here is that the perception of incivility is lost very often, even on the perpetrator of incivility. So in terms of understanding what incivility feels like, I borrowed this graphic years ago and I never gave it back. Incivility can suck the joy out of your organization. It can suck the joy out of your work life. And so you might be sitting there now going, no, I really belong to a really good team now. But think back to an assignment you had or an organization you worked with. It could have been your church group. It could have been any group. It could have been in PPAM. It could have been anywhere. Was there a moment or a sense where you were not your best because of the presence of incivility in that entity? So what I really want you to do is start creating distinctions in your mind about when you have actually experienced incivility and what it looked like, and how you might have contributed to incivility and what that might have looked like. So this is a leadership seminar. I've told you this long story about how we got to this perspective. You know what? Workplace incivility is a leader's challenge. So on the one hand, you're an employee in your organization and you might be experiencing or observing incivility in your work group. We are all leaders, regardless of where we sit or regardless of our current sphere of influence. And for many of you being in attending these seminars, these PPAM seminars, you're aspiring to higher levels of leadership throughout Department of Defense, throughout the federal government. Workplace incivility is a leader's challenge because, as General Taguba said, a leader's challenge is to create positive social norms, and leaders can help set behavioral expectations. So let me say this again, a leader's challenge is to create positive social norms and set behavioral expectations. In every one of our relationships, either personal or professional, our behavior is guided by a set of rules or social norms. We say please and thank you. We don't interrupt. We make appropriate degrees of eye contact with somebody. The list goes on. In a professional environment, these norms are generally understood and accepted. And for the most part, they are unspoken. But when they are not being practiced, and it could be as a result of lacking social skills somewhere else in your portfolio, or it could be because somebody is intimidated by somebody. But when these behaviors are not practiced, it becomes evident to those that are watching. And this idea that you as a leader and an influencer, You set the tone for you, and you have the ability to create the tone around you. John Maxwell is quoted as saying that a leader's attitude is caught by his or her followers more quickly than his actions. And General Taguba, you mentioned that when you launched today's topic, from the assignments that you've had, and that certainly for those in uniform, you have to conduct your culture assessment within 90 days. Everybody's watching. Think about civility and incivility and how it plays out in your work life. Somebody is always watching. The culture, beliefs, and values of any organization, business enterprise, or your work group, it is shaped by the worst behavior that the leader is willing to put up with. The culture of your organization is shaped by the worst behavior that the leader is willing to put up with. And what you put up with is what you will end up with. And that can be in your personal life, in your professional life, in your church community, in any community. People are watching what you're willing to put up with, and that's the behavior they will treat you with, and those around you. So it matters what leaders do, because the culture of your organization is shaped by the behaviors you tolerate or praise. Long story, short rendition, there are 3 pillars to workplace incivility. Being respectful, being generous, and being trusting. And that may sound very simple, but it's being respectful even in the face of disagreement. Being generous even when there is a cost to doing so. And being trusting even when there is a risk of being so. This is the nascent social contract of the feudal ages, the mutual reciprocity. You know, that day I stepped outside of my wooden hut in some medieval village, somebody had to make the first step. And so if you want to create a stronger vein of civility in your work life, somebody has to make the first step. Being respectful in the face of disagreement, being generous when there's a cost to doing so, and being trusting when there is a risk of being trusting. So workplace civility is, I told you everything that incivility was, but workplace civility is a respectful, generous, trusting interaction with fellow workplace and work life participants. So, did you ever wonder how behaviors are developed? If anybody wants to put anything in the chat box, because I say civility is a leadership competency. So what do you see in this picture? Or if anybody can unmute for a moment, anybody want to contribute there? Tony, General Taguba, how are behaviors developed?
Or through your sense of values. You know, if there was I go back to when we had a program in the Army called consideration of others. And what matters in that is follow the golden rule. Just to answer the question is that you want to be treated the same way that other people would want to be treated, right? So it's the golden rule, and the consideration of others was developed way back in the 1995 series of sexual assaults against female recruits, and this led to an army-wide investigation of how women are being treated as recruits and how people are treating each other in the force. So that's the behavior that we're supposed to have. I mean, you could be as a super commander or super supervisor, but again, do you have the moral code to say be respectful? I used to
Thank
believe
you.
yeah, I used to believe that drill sergeants were the badass people, you know, and I learned that as a lieutenant, that you could intimidate people to perform, but they won't perform because they were intimidated. Because commanders and leaders are, as my mentor and tormentor once said, your responsibility as a leader is to resource your people for success, not to make them fail. And that deals with a lot of civility in the workplace. Is that you want them not to remember you, but to respect you for respecting them as well. And I've always believed that. And that they'll remember you for that. They'll also remember the badass commander that didn't care for them as well. So
Everybody serves as an example. Thank you, sir. So if the leaders talk,
Sorry, there's several things on the chat box about what that was.
so I'm not able to see the chat box, I don't believe.
Oh, it's down here. It says chats. Just, so anyway, it says norms, cultural behaviors, imitate, do as leaders do, upbringing, traditions, and culture. I believe behavior is learned. That's what we have.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for doing that. So the leader's challenge is to understand that there is an impact to incivility. And incivility, it always happens just below the radar where HR isn't really concerned. It's not a reportable issue, at least in the beginning. But if a leader doesn't understand the impact of incivility and the root cause of incivility, he or she is not going to have the awareness that he needs to up his game. He needs to start talking about the expectations for workplace civility. So research indicates that 90% of those surveyed deemed incivility a serious workplace difficulty, which can wear away at the organization's fabric and diminish performance over time. Incivility can suck the joy out of your organization. If you come into a new organization, you might have experienced a culture where it just didn't feel right. And as you start to peel back the onion, you'll see the things that had transpired before you got there contributed to workplace incivility. So the leader's challenge is what to do in today's workplace. It's obviously way beyond the scope of this seminar for me to walk you through all of the things that you can do. But what I can do is give you some nuggets on why you would want to choose to be civil. Why you would want to choose to be civil. And as you coach and mentor people around you, regardless of your sphere of influence, regardless of the position you currently hold in the organization, we all coach and mentor people around us because the tone we give is the tone we get back. So let me share with you some global reasons why we would want to choose civility in our workplace versus incivility. Life is difficult. Everybody's fighting a hard battle. Plato said, be kind, for everybody you meet is actually fighting a harder battle. You don't know what's going on in somebody else's life. You don't know for what reason they are showing up and presenting themselves in the manner they're presenting themselves. But if you take the first step, if you practice the restraint, if you practice civility, you may be helping that person in a way that you would never have expected. Paul of Thesaurus says, be not forgetful to entertain strangers, as thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Regardless of a person's position, they deserve your civility. Just because they're low rank or low in social status does not mean they don't deserve your civility. And so as you're coaching and mentoring young people coming up behind you, this is a conversation you may have to have sometimes. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers. Sun Tzu, command troops with civility and imbue them uniformly with martial order, and it can be said that victory is certain. Just as General Taguba said, you'll always remember the great boss who watched out for you and how far you are willing to go to support that boss. And I guarantee you, we all remember the jerks we worked for and how we couldn't wait to get out of their command, how we did not give them our best game. And maybe we weren't aware at the time that that's how it was. But those who treat us uncivilly in our own leadership chain, we withhold, you know, they say, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. We withhold our best effort for those who treat us with respect. Confucius, our master, is benign, upright, courteous, temperate, and complacent, and then he gets his information. Nobody gives you the information you need when you're yelling at them, but if you have a track record of being respectful and courteous to people, it's amazing what you can find out. People will always tell you what it is you need to know if you quietly and comfortably listen to what it is they're telling you. And finally, this is for those of us who are having to manage up and may currently be working with bosses that aren't presenting themselves as civil members of the organization. Just because an animal is large, AKA your big boss, it doesn't mean that he doesn't want kindness. However big Tigger seems to be, remember he wants as much kindness as Roo. It's from Winnie the Pooh. So, you know, we sometimes feel the victim in our own little world where we think people are being uncivil towards us. What are we doing to manage up to help our bosses understand that when we show them civility, it's helping them get through their day? Wrapping up, this was a long story. Incivility can suck the joy out of your organization. Workplace civility matters. And so in the hallway, if we ever get back in the building, if we ever get back to having real live discussions with people, or even here in the virtual world, civility matters. The courtesy, the how are you, the greeting, all of these things matter. They're foundational in building a civil culture. You can take this idea and make it resonate throughout your organization, regardless of who your sphere of influence is over. If you talk to 5 people this week and give them this buzzword that, you know, workplace civility matters, and here's something that I'm working on, you are already changing the tide of what General Taguba talked about, and why the reason you asked me this, people asked me to talk about this topic. Workplace civility matters because incivility can suck the joy out of your organization. Okay, I started off by telling you awareness is the greatest agent for change. What you have now is some distinctions, some additional vocabulary, some insight to how bad things was, certainly from a Western European perspective, where we are today, and how easily it can all fall apart. I believe this idea of awareness, it's the most consequential idea we have towards making our work lives and our workplaces more meaningful, productive, and enjoyable. So if we can just practice the art of becoming aware of what's going on around us, you remember those statistics I gave you, and everybody said, no, it wasn't me. Catch yourself in the act of being uncivil and see how other people are reacting to you because of those behaviors, so that you now know that, one, you might be contributing to incivility in your workplace, and make a decision to do something about it. That's it. Workplace civility matters. We spend so much of our time in our work life thinking about our work, doing our work for the mission, the vision, the reason we do what we do, not just the financial reasons. And it should be joyful. We should be able to flourish in our work lives. Workplace civility matters.
Any questions, please unmute yourselves, and Tina will help.
Yeah, I hope you ask questions. And before she entertains your questions, you know, it's an important topic, as you all know. We have a few PPOM members that have called directly, at least to me, of how do they resolve their experience of civility. Two that comes to mind where one was being harassed by her boss and has reported it over time, but the bottom line was that she then took actions in her hands and filed a lawsuit against not only to the boss, but also against the United States Army, a chain of command. And of course, resulted in having her go to another location to do her job. She's a PhD, by the way, that rose from a sergeant when I first met her, and now she's a PhD. The second one was when working in the federal government, where the political appointee told the group that literally he did not like Asians working for him. So that's racial, but they didn't know how to address that. So another phone call, because there's a fear of retribution when you report your boss, that they will not be believed, even if they go to the IG. I've known bosses that create incivility. And of course, the fear is that, how are you going to go up there and tell them that, hey, boss, you're creating a little, discomfort in the command here because of the way you're performing as a micromanager. And they know it, but then they don't do the right thing by correcting the behavior until they go to the IG and report them. And I've known generals, for example, that are relieved of command or relieved or, given a letter reprimand where it's a career-ending process for them. So it's a very important, the behavior, as Dr. Tina said, is very important. And this goes back to setting the tone, right? So when I did my first command climate survey, they didn't have anything good to say about the command because it was all addressed against my predecessor. But then I own it now. So it reflects on me. And that's probably the hardest thing to do without pointing fingers. So my 3-star mentor and tormentor said, hey, doesn't matter. It is your command. Now fix it. And so the burden of proof of correcting that behavior that it did not originate with me, it was very difficult because there's one word that's also gains how you lead. It's called trust. They will trust you if they respect you. They will not trust you if they don't believe in you or respect you. And you have to earn that. Okay, questions? All of you stay awake. Like you, McKinley.
Yes, sir. Dr. Tina, I do have a question for you. Actually, I came a couple of questions. I was wondering, what are the assumptions, regarding, civility in the workplace or incivility in the workplace? And secondly, what happens when incivility is rewarded or people get promoted when they're being incivil and so forth?
Yeah, so the first one is, I think we all own it, McKinley, because it's on the continuum of deviant behavior, and certainly it's on the low end. It's always just below the radar. But when we don't call people up on their behavior, we're permitting the behavior to continue. And perhaps that person who was, I don't know the second case, but perhaps people who get promoted and they are uncivil, is that incivility in front of the promotion board? Is it in front of the boss who promoted them? Or is it out of sight? And when we don't call people on deviant behavior, it's always low level. It starts out low level. And when we don't call people on their behavior, I mean, it would be like, let's just say, I love sarcasm as much as the next person. So McKinley, let's just say you and I banter back and forth at work, and we're making some, we enjoy a good repartee, and we're making some comments back and forth. And somebody else joins the conversation and our sarcasm spills over to them. That wouldn't be appropriate. And you would owe me the, hey, Dr. Tina, that's, you know, that's how you and I chat, but that's not how we talk to other people. It's at such a fundamental level that we all have to take ownership in it.
Yes, I guess what I was thinking about specifically, and not to get political, but thinking about bullying, for example. It has seemed, and thinking about our previous president, he has seemed to do well. And of course, as a result of character, you know, it's become or been accepted, or, you know, kind of changed the norms, you know, and I think, you know, when we look at assumptions, I think one that I comes to mind is whether or not the individual cares what he does, or, you know, I think about the the ends justify the means, okay, kind of thing.
So here's my thought. People in power use incivility to hold on to power.
Okay.
But that's just one person. And so do we let that one person shape the culture of the whole organization? Or do we, you know, speaking truth to power is an overused expression. But at some point we have to step up, you know, as long as we don't get our heads chopped off. But even if we're not in a position to speak truth to power and say, hey, that behavior is just so off the radar. For example, let's just put you in a work situation. You had some subordinates with you, you went to brief the boss. The boss is yelling at everybody, but not using profanity. He's just rude and disrespectful. He's yelling at everybody. And there's very little you can do in that moment. But as soon as that meeting's over, regardless of your position with the boss, you circle back to your subordinates and go, I hope you understand that behavior is inappropriate. You can't change that person, but you certainly can show those who need to know what right should look like. Best I can do.
Thank you very much.
McKinley, are you in London?
I wish I was elsewhere, but no, I'm actually at Joint Base McGuire Dixon Lakehurst. But that is a photo of the Parliament in Hungary, where I was once stationed.
Oh, okay.
Just to add what Dr. Tina and McKinley said, you know, it takes moral courage to go up to the boss and say, boss, I mean, that's not acceptable behavior, and be prepared to get lashed out, right? And you know, it just matter, you do have to bring it up to their attention that it's not right to be cussing. I've known at least one general officer who did that all the time. Yeah, that's not acceptable behavior, because you're mad at something or you're mad at somebody. When I was in command, I often use what I call periodic sensing sessions, just to know what the heck is going on in the command. And 3 questions that I learned from my tour mentor is that you assemble everybody, all the leaders and that will come, and you say, okay, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you fill out 3x5 cards. The first question is, what's going right? And you write it down, everybody. And secondly is, what's going wrong? What's not right? And then the third question is, if you were the commander for the day, what would you change. You have three, you can make 3 comments and assemble all of the comments, and then he doesn't see them. The second in command sees them along with the sergeant major, and they steal all that organization, and then they present it to the commander. Whether he likes it or not, he's not allowed to be defensive. The whole exercise, the outcome of that exercise is that people are not happy. There are some happy with some instances, they're not happy, but they want change. Did it every 6 months. And I was voted not the most popular commander in that brigade. Okay. Because, not because of what I did directly, but because what my commanders were not doing to create a positive, healthy, safe environment. They went over the chain of command to tell me indirectly in comments that we need some improvements in here to include families. So that's that responsibility that bosses carry, and not to be defensive, because you're responsible for the health and welfare of the troops. And the last thing you want is somebody will go outside the chain of command and contact a congressman, a member of Congress, because there's some incivility that's going on in the command. And that's a bigger challenge, that now you're in trouble, that we didn't do any corrective action. That's the challenge that's being discussed here today. Create that tone. We also have what they call an open door policy, right? For those of you, I don't know about the civilian world, open door policy. You can make an appointment and go to boss. You know what I don't like about that? Is because you have to make an appointment. I don't like a private first class Taguba having to make an appointment through the first sergeant all the way up to the chain of command because they want to see the commander. It's counterintuitive when you say, you can see me anytime, just let me know, without having to go through the gates and everybody wants to know what the heck your problem is. That's not what that policy is about. But people actually do that. Make an appointment and go to the sergeant, go to the chain of command. No, what do? There's just, I'm just not perfect. I call the command together and we have solved the problem without any retribution. There's always that fear of retribution when you tell the boss that he doesn't have any clothes on, you know, because it, like Dr. Tina said, it affects the entire command. If you don't do anything right, the whole command will know about it. Back to trust. So that's a challenge of being civil, is trust.
Sir, if I,
All right,
Mike, you
come on
if
now.
I can add a comment.
Sure.
In the military side, so I would create an open door policy without appointments. Everyone had access to my calendar, and I had what I called office hours. And I could occupy my time always with doing something, but as soon as somebody walked through that door, my pen went down, my hands came off the keyboards, walked around, and we sat at the table away from my desk. So that took care of the appointments thing. When I was director in OSD, had the exact same thing, office hours. And it was that 1 hour every day that was protected. You know, admin knew that they couldn't put anything on there. And I only had to tell someone to stand by while I was on the phone call or I had a Tambird call going on. But I would usually tell a person, and even if those are above my chain, hey, can I call you back? You know, so to take care of that, you know, I would just offer that tip to folks. It worked very well when I was in the military. It worked very well when I was in the federal service, and you may want to think about that as a tip. Over, back
Hey,
to you,
Dr.
sir.
Tina.
Anybody else? I think there's some people who. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Hey,
Dr. Tina. I'm really grateful for so much research that you've done, and I realize it takes a lot of research to distill the history of civility development into a 5-minute synopsis. So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions that just curious as to your viewpoint on that. You know, there are a lot of studies that are out there about personalities and character that, you know, when do those things get set in personal development, and there's age varies from 5 to, you know, Jewish culture says 30 years is in because that's when you are a person, a whole person and fully mature, and probably that's the reason why Jesus started his ministry at, you know, when he was 30. But my curious thing is, when you look at the leader or a leader, and you must have, I assume that you read, there's a small book called Servant Leadership
Mhm.
by Ken Keith. He lives here in Hawaii. You know, tremendous book, and I wonder how that could be weaved into because we're all leaders in some various levels, how that could be weaved into where we're not necessarily talking about how to manage organization, but how you become a serving leader so that you're leading by example. And have you considered that aspect of it, and what you feel about it?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of threads there. First of all, I come at a lot of my work through the lens of MBTI. You know, we're one of 16 components. It's from birth. That's where we are. But that doesn't define us. That doesn't mean we always have to behave the way we think people in that box behave. And so I think everything, soft skills are learned, leadership is learned. And you can go through, I mean, we're in a community, we're intellectually gifted, we're high IQ, we've all gone through multiple academic journeys, and we've learned our technical skills. It's the soft skills that these are the things that we can continue to learn if we choose to. First of all, we have to have awareness that they're important. Secondly, we have to have an awareness that we don't have them naturally. And 3, we have to have an awareness that there's a path, there's a repetitive path that you have to go through. So we are all leaders, regardless of our sphere, our current sphere of influence. Because you don't get picked for your next leadership job based on what's written on the page. You get picked based on the behaviors and performance that you're presenting in the weeks, the months, the years coming up to your next assignment. So I think regardless of where anybody is in the organization chart, they have leadership stamped on their forehead, because we all have a sphere of influence where we're influencing other people, because we influence people from babies from the day they're born. That's how they get the attention they get. They influence. It's the cherubic little face. Dogs influence us by being so cute and fluffy. Everybody's influencing somebody. So are we doing it effectively to get what we want? Or are we repulsing them that we're not getting what we want? I'm not sure that answered your question. Other than to restate, everybody's a leader regardless of where they're sitting.
Yeah, I think so, because I support the notion that that, you know, the constant improvement is what we're seeking as a leader, and if you're learning, given that we have certain personalities and character traits, but you use that as a foundation, but all your interactions. And I like the idea of the open mics, the office time, office hours, and we've had that in various different ways over the course of our careers. But how you actually do it, like the way Mike mentioned, I really like it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
We
So,
have a
Mi-
cadet. Go
Miss
ahead.
Tina, Dr. Tina, thanks for doing this, and I apologize for being late. But you bring up a good point about learning your soft skills. I mean, first of all, it's anything but, it's easy. It's nothing but easy. And you kind of have to practice that, which means, just face it, folks, you're going to screw it up, but that's okay, as long as you pay attention to it. But outside of, your job, where it kind of matters because people are watching your performance and they're making assessments and judgments on, are you experienced enough? Do you have enough breadth of experience to assume the duties and responsibilities of the next higher grade? I've always kind of advocated, if you want to learn about how to lead and manage folks, go volunteer to lead a committee on a nonprofit or a project on a nonprofit. It's kind of like herding cats. You talk the wrong way to somebody, you'll know pretty well because people will vote with their feet. Are there other, ways that you would recommend other than just, acquiring book knowledge that you could learn how to practice those and hone your skills so that you're better prepared for a leadership role, whether it's a small group, a project, or a squadron command for that matter?
Look, I could put on my coaching hat, Mike, and say it's all about awareness. If you're going through life with no sense of how you're going through life, you'll never see how you're impacting other people. So self-awareness is key. And you haven't been to a military or civilian school in DOD or across the federal government that doesn't tell you the first step of leadership is self-awareness. Self-awareness is the greatest agent for change. If you can't see yourself in the moment and how other people are reacting to you, you're not really in tune with it all. And I mean, that's the conversation. You get really mad at somebody and you go, can you see yourself? And people who don't see themselves don't see themselves. And so this whole exercise of self-reflection, catching yourself in the act. Look, you can even catch yourself in the act of being civil. And it's suspended animation because you catch yourself in the act of being civil and you notice people in the second and third tier are watching you and you get to see how they're reacting. And even the protagonist or the bully or the obnoxious person, they might be so incensed at that moment, but later they may very well reflect on your civil behavior, that you didn't escalate the situation. So self-reflection is key. We can all read all the books, we can do all the TED Talks, we can go to all the great seminars, but it starts with self, catching yourself in the act of how you're behaving and how other people are reacting to us.
That's a good point. I just have read a book by Novogratz, and the title of the book was the Manifesto of Your Moral Foundation. And a chapter in that book talks about your identity. Do you know your identity besides your color, besides your religion, besides your values? How do you express your identity to other people? That you're worthy to be trusted, you're worthy to be followed, and the like. And that's, it's very glaring to me that maybe I don't know my own identity, other than I should just treat people that I lead with respect, because I want them to at least know where I stand, what my values are. And that's about the behavior, because my role model has always been my mother. Very generous, church going, kind to people, and always, treat respect and dignity, because she know what incivility was, having been detained by the Japanese troops during World War II. That inhumanity was not to be followed. Humanity is actually more on the course of human life. I just want to say that, but we do have a cadet in our audience, and soon he will graduate in about 2 years to be a brand new second lieutenant. after graduating from the
Hey.
United States Military Academy. And his name is Kirk Ruaro. And he is very attentive here because he wants to know what the military will be, because he will be a brand new second lieutenant when he graduates. And how will his character will evolve over time and be developed to be a trusted leader and know what civility and incivility is all about. So I'm going to ask him to ask a pointed question to all of us, and I'll have Dr. Tina answer it. Kirk, you listening?
Yes, sir. What do you need me? What do you need me to do, sir?
I want you to ask what would you expect out of this conversation that we're having when you wear that second lieutenant bar, and how would you know if your commander or the organization is going to be a good unit or a bad unit?
Well, often, sir, people kind of look at the quantitative gauge marks as to performance, but according to these theories, and what I've learned being ethics and morals, I think that's what you got to evaluate first, and then the performance commonly should follow. If not, then that's a different story. But I think definitely the priority is the ethics and morals priority of the unit. Set the tone, like Dr. Martina said. So that's what I'll take away from this today.
See, you got an A, Tina. So, it's all about, we don't teach how do you develop your leadership philosophy. That's just another thing that you read at the Harvard Business Review. But if I ever asked, I don't need an answer, but we try to teach our brand new second lieutenants how to develop their leadership philosophy.
Mhm.
Don't write a thesis on it. I learned from my mentors and tormentors that put it in one page, bold 14, and tell everybody all the way down to the lowest ranking man in that unit what your leadership philosophies are. And they'll know. My number one was, I will foster a positive, healthy command climate. We will do everything to standard. We will do all of our training safely without any casualties. We'll always take care of our family members, and we'll always have fun, be a team. Now I didn't get a perfect score all the time, but if I didn't do it right, I apologize.
Sir,
And that's
you
hard
know,
to do. Leaders are hard at apologizing to their troops because that's a sign of weakness, right? But you got to do it. Sometimes you just got to, suck it up and say, I didn't do it right this time.
yeah. And this is for the West Point cadet Kirk. One of the things that I found was, and I used to be an NCO before I came commissioned, but we used to filter things for our bosses, our NCOICs, the first shirt, because we were in that chain, and we often try to filter things for him. When I became in a position of leadership, I used to grab my, my seconds and say, okay, what have you filtered for me? Because that was their job, frankly. But I wanted to know. And the reason what I told them was kind of like reporting things to, for intelligent things and stuff like that is, one person has the big sit A, what might be a minor problem for you. If you've got one person that's kind of the collector, which would be me in that instance, then you can see a bigger picture. So I would just ask folks, okay, so what have you, filtered for me, or on my behalf? And we would just put it all out there, and we would often have some interesting discussions about that. So maybe as a tool or a tip, it's you don't rat your guys out if you want to protect that kind of thinking. But hey, they're actually tasked to relieve you of all the little nits that good NCOs and stuff will do. My subordinates, it was what they did too. And so it was a great time to just flush it all out and hear it for the first time. And then we would kind of figure out if there was a problem set, you know? Once, okay, twice, yeah, that's a pattern now. You know?
You know,
Yeah.
Mike, that's the, oh, that's just Bob. I didn't report it because that's just Bob. And that's sometimes how stuff happens,
All right.
because our tolerance for the just Bob is not necessarily it's not necessarily to the organization's benefit.
Yeah, we usually did it over scotch in my office. We closed the door.
Let me ask our two special guests, Ken and Mark. What do you think? What are your questions? Do you have any questions whatsoever on what was presented, what was discussed in our seminar?
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Hey,
Great.
Mark,
Hi, Mark.
sorry for you being
You
put
don't
on
have to
this.
be nice to Martina just because she lives like close by to you.
Don't worry. No, I've really enjoyed this, and I suppose I come from, obviously I'm an electronics guy, right? So the military world is very different to me. But the big question I've had in my head, and I'm thinking about my own experience, is how does hierarchy influence incivility and behavior, right? So dealing with bosses who have a position of power over you, behave uncivilly and can get away with it, right? And this is something I've experienced and seen. And I have another sort of maybe a geographical comment on this, in that I'm based in Europe, I'm based in Ireland, but I've worked a lot with American corporates, and I've seen a distinct difference between the US system and say European system, because in the US, your boss can fire you almost instantaneously, right? Whereas in Europe, it's a much more protracted process. And I've seen a direct, what I would say, people are much more criticize or to challenge their bosses and associated behaviors they don't like in Europe, whereas it's more hierarchical. Me to hierarchy can enable people of power to be uncivil. So Tina, would you
Yeah,
correlate
I-
that, or would you agree?
I do agree, and I have this little vignette that somehow explains this. If you look back at American employment history, if any of your parents grew up in a company town, whether it was the coal plant or the factory or whatever, where everybody worked in the factory, everybody worked on the assembly line for 20 or 30 years. You had to get along because your work life, your social life, your religious group, you were all there together. And so you had to get along. You kind of just had to rub along together to get through it all. So you practiced greater restraint. You might be more open to the sarcasm and the comments and everything else, but you, at the end of the day, you still all had to get along. Fast forward to 2021, we're all just ships in the night. Whether I'm passing you in a command, I'm passing you in an organization, or I'm passing you because I'm working for, let's just say, corporate Starbucks or corporate Walmart. I no longer have a vested interest in creating a long-term relationship with you because we're just passing each other by. And that contributes to, I think, to this growth of incivility in the workplace, because I no longer have a vested interest in committing to our relationship. I do see it differently in Europe. I do see a higher degree of civility, and not because Western Europeans might be any more civil or uncivil than any other group, but I do believe that the permanency of your work gives you ground to vest into a relationship with other people. That's just my theory on things. So if you can't fire me, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not going to burn my bridges with you.
I'd agree with that, but also if you're in it, for, if you can't fire me, then I can maybe contest your uncivil behavior more freely,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, yes. There is that. The reverse of that. You certainly can. If I'm secure in my employment, I can talk to you about your bad behavior. And you know, on the US side, we have this wonderful term as speaking truth to power, which in theory is a wonderful idea. But when you're insecure in your employment, it's very difficult. It would be very difficult for Kirk to speak truth to power to two-star Major General Taguba based on his current position. In reality, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So thank you for that observation, Mark. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, General Taguba, for putting my guests on the spot and for putting the cadet on the spot.
We have 4 minutes. Anybody else with questions? If not, we'll have General Taguba close up.
Before I close, there was a question about if you you have somebody that's uncivil and made it all the way up to the ranks. I do know of a few of them, and it caught up with them after a while, and to the point where they're discovered, and it goes back to the guy that actually helped propagate that behavior, and they either are not promoted again, unless they're 4 stars, but it catches up with them. But I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank Dr. Tina Carroll Garrison for delivering what I call a very, it's not a sensitive topic, it is, but we ought to discuss it openly because it exists today. Very badly, it exists today. People, just don't have the capacity to be respectful. And they do it, some of them do it openly. And that's, unforgivable, inconceivable. And I think all of us have learned that, when you say your leadership philosophy as your aspiration, be sure you do it with the belief that it is true. Otherwise, they'll call you out. Another good book for you is called The Cost of Bad Behavior, How Incivility is Damaging Your Business and What to Do About It by Pearson of Porath.
Great book.
Yeah, great book. So
yeah, if you think this is just all about good manners, there is a financial impact to it.
Exactly. So I think we have learned a lot from Dr. Tina, all the way from Fort Garrison. That's the name of her home now. It is a fort in Ireland. And I want to thank Kevin and Mark for attending our great seminar, for all of you for attending in your precious time on Saturday. We have 2 more. One is Leadership in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which is sometime in May. And the other one is in July, Standards of Conduct. They're all related. If there's a Standards of Conduct on Public Service, by the way, developed by President H.W. Bush, the 14 Principles of Ethical Conduct. And the first one is public service is public trust. And a lot of people don't follow it, especially in Washington, D.C. But thank you for attending. I see some familiar faces on here. And with that, I want to thank Tina for allowing us to hear her perspective, which is very important, and for all of you to contribute. Okay, so stay safe, stay away from COVID, get your vaccinations, and have a great spring.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tina.
Thanks, Tina.
Thanks,
Wonderful.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lita.
Bye.